We are now looking at section 9.4, which is looking at a war with Mexico. Looking at our objectives for this chapter, we have three. Summarize the conflicting attitudes on waging war with Mexico. Identify U.S. territories gained from Mexico. And explain the impact of the discovery of gold in California on the development of the West. This is where we are sort of leaving off. We have the states as in the red. We have Arkansas Territory, Florida Territory, and we have foreign areas. Now, we just looked at how Texas, that is this area right here, it becomes a part of the U.S. right at the end of chapter 9.3. Part of that is due to this man, James K. Polk. He is a president, and even though there's debate on whether Texas should be a part of America, he decides that yes, it should be. And the reason is because of the Missouri State Compromise Line, which we've looked at before, Texas would fall under slave states and slave territory. Since Polk was a slave owner himself, he actually wants Texas, New Mexico, and California to join the United States. Sort of looking at Texas, we have American settlers move in. Mexico does not stop them, all right? Mexico actually invited American settlers. Then we have settlers want Texas to be independent. And of course, Mexico reacts furiously. Here is the Republic of Texas. This is the area that has now joined the U.S. at the end of chapter 9.2. Now, Polk not only wanted Texas to be a part of the United States, but he is now looking further. He actually wants to go to war with Mexico so that America can gain even more land such as New Mexico, California, possibly Arizona, these areas. Polk ends up sending an American who is able to speak Spanish, John Slidell. He sends him to the Southwest and is trying to negotiate at the Texas border. So he is actually going to Mexican territory and trying to say, hey, we want this land, we will pay you for this land. Mexican is a little bit on shaky ground. Santa Anna, the president, he has been ousted. He's no longer in charge of Mexico. So Mexican overall politically is very unstable. But they sort of ignore Slidell, the American going there. And this is sort of feeds Polk's fire for wanting to have war with Mexico. So what Polk ends up doing is he orders a general, Zachary Taylor, to go and block or create a block in the Rio Grande. Okay, this was seen as a huge offense by Mexicans. They did not like that the Americans were sort of stating their ground and blockading Mexico. Not everyone is happy about Polk's wanting to expand territory. Now, mostly the people who were against were people in the north. Again, looking at that Missouri Compromise Line, all the new territories that Polk wants to sort of take over, these are all in the southern part. That means that these states would be slave states. The Northerners, they didn't want to see slavery expanded. So people like any abolitionists, they were against this sort of expansion, and most of all the Northerners. In favor, we have the Southerners. So the Southerners, they're seeing this as a possible way to increase their power in government. They're also seeing it as a way to extend slavery. Overall, there's sort of division over this. We even have someone who is pro-slavery, who is Calhoun. We've talked about Calhoun before. He is even sort of worried about this idea to expand America. So war has not quite started with Mexico yet, but there's a lot of tension in this area near the Rio Grande. Now the U.S., they end up just violating Mexican law. They end up going into Mexico, into a California valley, and they're trying to explore. Now, this was generally a peaceful thing that these American troops wanted to do, but they were violating Mexican law regardless. Because Mexico had sort of been fed up of all these Americans sort of venturing into their territory, they end up bringing troops to the Rio Grande. And it sort of ends up in a small little, we could say battle, but it would be even smaller than a battle. In this sort of small fight, we have 9 Americans being killed. Now, Polk, he takes this as proof of Mexico wanting to start a fight with America. So he runs back to the Congress and he is saying we need to start a war with Mexico. Mexico has spilled American blood on American soil. Now, even though Polk sort of exaggerated the events of what happened here, the Congress does decide to go to war. So Polk was successful. He has now got the war that he wanted. This marks the first time that the U.S. starts a foreign war over expansion of its territory. So war has now been declared, and we start to see troops moving towards the west. The first troop is led by Stephen Kearny. Now, Stephen Kearny goes to Santa Fe in New Mexico, and he is ready to fight with his men. But when they arrive there, the Mexican upper class, they want to be American. So, no shot is fired. Basically, New Mexico is taken and is now an American state. California is just as easy. So, it's easily overtaken as well, as at this point, there are not many settlers in California, Mexican or American. Kearny sort of follow up with his army, and they would outnumber any Mexican troops that are in California. And so again, California is just kind of taken over. This leads eventually to the Treaty of Guadalupe. Basically, what's happening is the U.S. easily taking over any sort of states that they want. And the reason why is because we have some very strong American generals leading armies to this area, whereas the Mexican troops are completely unorganized. Basically, if you are a settler in any Mexican region, you are to defend yourself. This, of course, results in a very easy takeover. So in 1848, we have the Treaty of Guadalupe signed. Basically, it's setting the Texas border at the Rio Grande. So where the Rio Grande River is, that is the border between Mexico and Texas. It also is giving $15 million for any Western lands that did belong to Mexico. So the Americans are paying a certain amount of money for land as well. It also is going to guarantee any rights of Mexicans who are already living in these territories that are now American. So Americans have to respect the Mexicans who have already settled in that area. This war, which is not a very bloody war, but it enlarges the U.S. territory by 1/3. We also have Franklin Pierce. He ends up solidifying America's territory gains in the West in 1853. And this sets the final border to 48 states. So here we have is the map developing of many more states. Wait. So as you can see, beforehand we had Mexico was owning all of this land, and now we see Mexico is here. Okay. Basically, their idea of manifest destiny has come into fruition, which means it's coming true. They are now owning all this land, and they will quickly start to populate this land as well. This comes to sort of the next thing. We have a huge discovery in California, which we call the gold rush. So here we actually have men. They are sifting through gold in some of these streams. So in 1848, Someone discovers gold in California. And what this means is it starts a gold rush. That means tons of people are booking it across the country to reach California to try and find gold and strike rich. 49ers come from Asia and South America and Europe. What a 49er is, these are sort of newly immigrants coming to California also trying to strike rich. So these are people coming from Asia and Europe all over the world to try and make an easy money. So California ends up populating quite quickly because of this. So the population soon exceeds 100,000. Also, California ends up becoming one of the most diverse populations. There are many white people, of course, but they're Chinese and they're also free blacks. So some of the richest African Americans at the time, they're the ones living in California. We also, of course, have Mexicans. By 1850, we have California joins the Union, but California joins as a free state. California never had slavery, even though technically California is under the Missouri Compromise line. Here is an example of some of the diversity that you're seeing in California at this time. So here we have some white people, but we also have some Chinese people over here. So your first question is, I want you to evaluate or look at President Polk's starting of the Mexican War. Do you think that it was a justified start? I also want you to make sure you include his actions in the office. Okay, so you're evaluating how Polk started the war with Mexico. Your second question is, what were some of the effects of the gold rush in California? So those are your two questions for the week.